Everyone had to deal with a bad neighbor at least once or twice in their life. Those who are unfortunate have to deal with them every day. This is one of those times. My neighborhood was a great place to live in. We didn't have any problems, and everyone usually got along. Sometimes we even held barbecues and parties. Although our peace didn't last too long, the house next door was sold and a new family arrived. The wife was an extremely unpleasant woman. For the next 2 years, all we ever talked about when we gathered together was how much of a lunatic our new neighbor was. One day, I suddenly got a call from my wife. She was rambling about kids and the police. I could hear some background noise, a woman yelling, two different men trying to explain something. The woman's voice was indeed familiar. I put two and two together and understood that it was another ruckus that our neighbor had caused. My wife sounded really anxious, so I asked her what had happened, and she explained the situation quickly. I had taken a leave that day to go to a neighboring town. My father was suddenly sick and admitted to the hospital. After a few checkups, they told us to go home and ask my father to rest until the results came back. It was nothing serious, they assured me. My father had a caretaker, and my mother was also there to check on him, so I dropped him off at the house and was on my way to return to my home when I received the call. It would have taken around 20 minutes for me to reach the police station my wife mentioned. When I entered, I saw our neighbor yelling and pointing fingers at my kids and a frustrated cop trying to explain something to her. My kids and wife looked incredibly pale and frightened. It wasn't the first time when she had called the cops. She called the enforcements regularly over minor issues. It was nothing that couldn't be solved over a discussion, and yet, the woman, like the entitled fool she was, chose to cause a commotion and force everyone else into her bullcrap. She had even been warned several times, but she never learned. This was the first time we were involved with her. Normally we ignored her. If she had an issue, we made sure to never do it again because we didn't want to deal with her. It was the easiest way. My wife and I had been busy people. We didn't have any time to waste. I stood beside my family and asked what had happened. The neighbor at once shouted, "Why are your kids always playing in the lawn? Why don't you teach them some manners and ask them to do it inside their house?" I was dumbfounded. Was this really the reason why she dragged my little kids to the police station? My wife calmly explained that the children were playing in our part of the property. They weren't playing in the part which belonged to the state, and even if they did, it wasn't illegal. The lady didn't wince once, and firmly stated that she was sure the kids were playing in the part which belonged to the town. I took one hard look at her and asked her if the kids were playing in her yard. She couldn't answer, so she kept going in circles how she was bothered about them using the town's property. It didn't make any sense. As a police officer myself, I had my fair share of dealing with such nutcases on a daily basis. I have to always be patient, but this was too much for me. I wasn't there as a cop, I was there as a father. She kept complaining about how loud my kids were and how she couldn't get any sleep. My kids were at school most of the time, and then they had their tuition. The only way she wouldn't be able to sleep was when they played outside, which was around 5 to 6 p.m. It wasn't an unusual time, and it was certainly not most people's preferred nap time. When I inquired if she slept around 5, she emphasized that she was allowed to sleep whenever she wanted to. With every question, her voice raised higher and higher. Then she looked the officer dead in the eye and said, "I want these kids to be arrested." Shocker? Not so much. I wasn't surprised in the least that she wanted my 9-year-old and my 5-year-old in jail. You could predict the bizarre demands crazy neighbors make every time things don't go their way. The look and smile that she had after saying that sentence was the definition of a smug face. I knew that this woman was only going to get crazier. My wife nudged me and asked if the kids would be okay. I asked her to take a seat and patiently wait. However, my patience was running out. I just knew I had to show her that when people make stupid decisions, they also have to deal with the consequences. I have a bunch of complaint against you. In fact, the whole neighborhood does. We were trying to wait to give you a chance to apologize, but I guess that's not happening," I spoke in a stern voice. She looked baffled and asked what complaints I could possibly have. This was my time to shine. I smiled and took out my phone. "Do you remember throwing things at Mr. Thomas Knightley's dog while he was playing outside?" I asked. I told her that I remember Thomas telling me that she was irritated every time the dog barked, so she hid herself near the bushes and threw pebbles at the poor dog. He even asked her to stop, but she told him to kill his dog. Her face turned yellow. Her lips were moving, but no voice came. She thought nobody would know anything about it. "Next," I said, "Lily from 126, the blonde high school kid that lived next to her." I asked the lady if she remembered when Lily asked her to not play loud music during quiet hours, but the music only got louder and she had to file a complaint against the woman. "It's already in the books in case you haven't forgotten," I reminded her. Her expression should have been captured and played in one of those barbecue sessions. I was sure it would be a hit. She hadn't realized how she had been digging her own grave for a long time. "And the best one," I said, "is what you keep doing to Mrs. Wynne. She lived right across our street, and our dear neighbor had been making several derogatory remarks on her looks and her country. All of it was enough for us to make a case against her. She asked me if I had any evidence to prove that she was doing these things, and I took out my phone and showed our group chat history. I told her that Thomas's yard had CCTV, and she has been recording hurting the dog several times. Mrs. Wynne and Lily had video and voice recordings of her, and of course, what she did to us wouldn't go unnoticed. We too had CCTV footage that would be enough to show that she was indeed bothering the kids and forcefully dragging them to the police station without any consent from the parents." That made her go quiet all of a sudden. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. As expected, she started crying about how everyone was plotting against her. She called her husband and told him that we were bullying her. Her acting was worse than the actors of a bad Hallmark movie. "I'm going to ask everyone to come with evidence, and I myself will file a complaint against you," I said. And of course, she did the next most predictable thing. She threatened to call the chief of police and make sure that she gets justice. I sighed. She was dragging the whole thing. I was truly sorry for her kids and husband. As soon as she said that, my wife burst into laughter. The lady gave her a perplexed look. I disparagingly smiled and said, "Go on then. I'm right in front of you. Tell me, why are you so right?" She didn't understand at first. I guess she had forgotten who I was because we had never really talked to each other. She asked what I meant, and I reminded her that she was, in fact, looking at the chief of police. That was the single most satisfying moment of that day. Her facial expression when she realized that I was the chief of police was golden. It was absolutely hilarious. She kept looking forth and back. "Since you don't look like the type to make amends, I'm going to ask the neighbors to finally file a complaint against you." I explained to her in simple words how she had broken multiple rules. I told her that I had asked the neighbors to document everything in case things ever get worse. We could sue her if we wanted. I told her that it's called neighbor harassment. She kept saying how I was only trying to frighten her, and I told her it was okay if she believed that. Basically, it would be a civil case, so you should start finding an attorney to defend you. I told her that we have multiple text messages, screenshots, as well as all the evidence that I already mentioned. If she was still not convinced, she should have gone ahead and tried us. Her pathetic act didn't last long. She realized that she had royally messed up. She had a contorted expression. I had never seen someone run so fast. She hurriedly got out of the police station and drove away in a haste. I knew it certainly wouldn't be the last time we hear from her. The next day, she demanded a meeting. Everyone was there. She went on and on about how I was taking advantage of my position. According to her, I had threatened to throw her out if she didn't do what my family said. Nobody spoke a word. She thought she would easily win everyone with her act and stupid claims. Eventually, I told her that we would be taking further steps if she doesn't stop being a headache. Everyone supported me and agreed. The next thing we knew, she rented her house to a new family and shifted to a different neighborhood. All of this happened within a span of a week. She looked furious and kept silently flipping her middle finger at everyone before she left. Thankfully, our new neighbors were good people who got along with everybody. We all had our suspicions when they arrived, but they haven't troubled anyone in any way. I still keep getting complaints of her from her new neighborhood. Not my circus, not my monkey. I am someone in my late 20s, brown fellow living in the South. I have been a regular at this small restaurant for a few years and usually sit at the bar. Sunday morning, I walk in and sit at the bar. Directly behind me is a booth with 4 ladies in their 20s having breakfast. I don't really pay much attention to them. The restaurant is pretty busy and all the waitresses are running around. I make small talk with the waitress, get my coffee, and order my food. As I waited, at some point, the ladies behind me had finished their food, left the booth, paid, and walked out. The table was being cleaned by another waitress, and she finds a pair of glasses and asks the waitress who had the table about them. I said the ladies just left and are probably still outside in the parking lot, and the waitress asked me if I could flag them down and give the glasses back. So, being friendly, I got the glasses and walked outside and found the ladies pulling out their car from their parking spot. As I tried to flag them to get their attention, the 2 ladies in the front seat make eye contact, start laughing, and then hit the gas without stopping. The ones in the back yell something and give me the middle finger. I said, screw it, threw the glasses in the trash and walked back to the restaurant. A few minutes later, I am back inside eating my food. I see one of the ladies walk back inside talking to the hostess. She points to the waitress that had the table and is inquiring about the glasses. I'm not going to lie, it felt good when they pointed at me and saw the look on their face. When the waitress asked what I had done with the glasses, I told them I put them in the trash outside when they gave me the middle finger. I didn't get an apology, the girl just walked out. A few minutes later, they came back asking which trash can I put the glasses into. I still hadn't gotten an apology, so I did what I thought was right and gave them the middle finger back, and they left. I had an opportunity last week to purchase an Xbox Series X from Best Buy, so I jumped onto it and was finally able to pick it up, Tuesday after having to wait a week for it. A few weeks before that, our next door neighbor in our duplex knocked on the door and accused us of smoking weed, and a lot of it. Apparently in our house, that his house was smelling like a bong, and his mother, who he lives with, shouldn't have to smell it. I informed him that A, we don't smoke, and B, we live in a completely legalized state, and there are people around us who smoke outside and even grow it, so if his house stinks, then it's more likely from our neighbors, and then shut the door in his face. The next day, I got a text from the landlord that said the neighbors had complained and wanted my side of what happened and reminded me that any kind of smoking in the unit was violating our lease and was grounds for eviction. So I told her that he was pretty rude and made a big, huge accusation about something he was totally wrong about. I reassured the landlord that we had not ever smoked in the house and don't smoke because my significant others and I's job required random drug tests. But I also took the time to tell the landlord that the neighbor smokes cigarettes right by our front door and the smell seeps into my house and I was tired of it. So she said she would tell him he was to stand no less than 10 feet away from the building from now on, which means he can't stand under the carports and smoke. So, Tuesday, I pick up my Xbox Series X from Best Buy, as I'm pulling into the carport, I see dude smoking under it, clearly not caring that the landlord told him not to. He sees me and his eyes light up once he realizes I have the new Xbox in my hands and says, "Oh my gosh, how did you get that? Can I come over and see it and play it once you get it set up?" I looked at him and said, "Yeah, no." Remember a couple weeks ago you tried to tell the landlord we were smoking pot in our house and lied and you almost got us evicted? Well, because of that incident, I'd rather you just not come into my house ever, and walked inside. Pretty sure I saw a tear under his eye before I closed the door. Assuming the marijuana confrontation was your only contact with this guy, in other words, assuming you guys haven't been hanging out with him, it's really freaking weird that he would ask a favor like that. Sure, some people are totally oblivious, but this smells like someone with a grudge trying to make an excuse to get into your house. I'd really like to second that camera idea. Yes, I read about the dogs. Do you walk them? The guy could get in then, no? He could just be an obnoxious dork with an Xbox obsession. No harm in taking a couple of precautions, though. When we first moved in, he was nice and all, and we talked, but nothing more than the norm like, how's it going? But then we started hearing from other neighbors that he had a hand in getting the previous tenants in our unit evicted for smoking pot in the house. So it seems to be his thing. He did come into our house once, but it was because he wanted to see our nerd room my other half told him about. But he was only inside for like 10 minutes. I had a demo and cleanup job I needed 5 guys for to be sure it was completed on time. I have 3 full-time workers, so I posted an ad for 2 guys to help finish the demo/cleanup. Got a response? A guy and his roommate will work for $22 an hour, etc. Told them to be on time at the site at 8. 8:30 hits, they're nowhere to be seen. I call, he tells me his roommate woke up late but ensures me that they are on their way. From where he said they lived to my job was about 30 minutes, so 9:30, still no show. Call, he says he had to stop to get gas and a bite to eat. 10 hits, and at this point, I figure he's just messing with me, so I play into it. He never shows up. About 6 months later, I need more help in another job. Post an ad, and this same guy responds. I figure I don't want him on my job, but I can mess with him. I give him an address in the hills, tell him to be there at 8. I fully expect that he will pull the same crap, so I just go about my day. Well, about 8:45, he calls me and is pissed because he was at the house at 8 and no one answered. Then he had to drive back down the hill, about 30 minutes, to get service to call me. I profusely apologize and tell him that I had to go to the lumber yard, but that I'm on my way back, so just go back up to the house and I'll be there in about 45 minutes. 2 hours later, he calls me, cussing me out. So worth it.